Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Mason Mondays, where we're going to be diving into questions shaping purpose, faith, and culture. I'm your host, Dr. M. John Mason, and I'm so glad you've joined us for this important conversation. For generations, the Black church has been more than just a spiritual home. It's been a moral compass, a rallying ground, and a prophetic voice calling America to accountability. From the hush harbors of the enslaved to the marches of the civil rights movement, the Black church has stood at the intersection of faith and freedom, often speaking truth to power when few others would. But today, many are asking, where is that prophetic voice now? In a time marked by political unrest, economic inequality, violence against Black bodies, and cultural shifts inside and outside the church, is the Black church still raising a prophetic cry? Or has it been silenced by respectability, by fear, or by sheer exhaustion? In today's episode, we're pulling back the curtain on this conversation. We'll explore the historical roots, the present day challenges, and the urgent opportunities for the Black church to reclaim and reimagine its prophetic mission. We'll wrestle with questions that are as personal as they are political. So get ready, because this isn't just a conversation about the church, it's a conversation about who we are, where we're headed, and what kind of world we want to help create. Now that I've set the stage, it's time to go a little bit deeper. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Reverend Dr. James E. Victor Jr., the esteemed pastor of the Mount Olive Baptist Church of Arlington, Virginia. He is a pastor, a scholar, an activist, an author, and my lifelong best friend, whose work has reshaped the communities in which he has been a part of. Reverend Victor will come in his own way and tell whatever he wants to tell. But let me just go ahead and put him up, and we will go from there.
Oh my, you started already.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Reverend Victor, welcome. It is a pleasure to have you on Mason Mondays, and I could not be more honored um, to have you here.
Thank you, Dr. Mason. In that we have been lifelong friends, nearly lifelong friends. I'm honored that you would consider me for uh, a partner in conversation for what I think is the most relevant topic today. And also, I think one that has the capacity to revolutionize congregations and awaken others.
Well, a couple of things. I know you. Be so kind as to just share with our audience where you are, what you're doing, and your semi biographical claim to fame.
Well, first of all, there is no claim to fame. I'm just a country preacher that got out of the country and
Oh, Lord, here we go again.
go to several places. Um, I currently serve as the ninth, I think, ninth pastor of the 152-year-old Mount Olive Baptist Church of Arlington, Virginia. Previously, I served as the assistant pastor at the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia, under the tenure of Dr. Joseph Lawrence Roberts Jr. Prior to that, I served 4 years as the pastor of the Mount Olive Baptist Church in Clarksville, Tennessee. And to show you how strange a sense of humor God has, I promised myself I'd never pastor another Mount Olive after my first one. And for nearly 24 years now, going on 24 years, I have occupied the senior minister role here in Arlington at the Mount Olive Baptist Church. We are historically predominantly African American congregation just outside of the nation's capital. We are part of what is affectionately known in this region as the DMV, the District, Maryland, and Virginia. And we are a congregation that has experienced a great deal of injustice in its history, but has always exhibited a great deal of defiance and resiliency. Part of our history is that when President Eisenhower decided to that he wanted the largest office building in the world, which is now known as the Pentagon, he disrupted and destroyed through the right of eminent domain a vibrant and flourishing Black community, which was then forcibly relocated to several places throughout Arlington County. We were promised money to move, and to my knowledge, have to this day yet to receive one red cent. And this congregation, under the leadership of Dr. Aaron Mackley, who pastored this people for 55 years, began the process of building a community and a church. And so I am the inheritor of that legacy. And it's a proud legacy. And of course, like any congregation that has such a historical tentacle and reach, it's always evolving.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let's just jump in. How do you define the prophetic voice of the Black church today?
I think that one, we cannot look at the prophetic voice of the church today without looking at some historical antecedents and recognizing that we stand on broad shoulders. And so I think that one of the things that we've got to wrestle with and come to terms with is that every African American congregation, by its very presence, is prophetic. There is a part of its DNA, its ontological makeup that makes it prophetic. When you consider that everything in the country has been designed to denude Black existence, Black success, Black life, Black spirituality, Black aesthetics, Black culture, then for an institution to exist that affirms Black existence and Black being is by its very nature prophetic, because in its gatherings on Sunday morning, its ministries throughout the week, its efforts to educate its young, it is making a statement against the culture that does not have any belief or places any value on Black life. So a church that has a scholarship fund in a society that says Black folks are intrinsically unable to learn is making a prophetic statement. A church that has a program of education, when the culture views Black folks in terms of uh, unrestrained excesses, is making a statement that we are able to discipline ourselves. So the very nature of the church, of the Black church, is prophetic. Now, having said that, that does not mean that every church, every Black church is a justice-seeking church. So therefore, I would define the prophetic witness of the Black church as not merely speaking truth to power, as it has typically been defined. I think that's an aspect, an element, a dimension of it. But I think when the church begins to seek justice against the systems of injustice that oppress Black life in any form, internally or externally, then the church is lifting a prophetic voice. And that prophetic voice, I think, is grounded in a vision of righteousness, of what things ought to be. Or to use Dr. King's language, the tension between isness and oughtness. So when we have a glimpse of how things should be, how there should be a table of community that is welcoming of all. When we have a vision of economic or the equal distribution of economics, so that every individual has what he or she needs to flourish in a society, and we address those systems that preclude that, that then is the church being prophetic. That is the church then seeking justice.
Using this broad brush that you have now painted this backdrop, take me back a little bit. In the last few decades, have, in your belief and in your vision, has the church maintained or lost this voice?
I think that's too generalized a categorization. I,
Then let
I
me.
would say,
That's fine.
I would
Let
say
me
that
bring it home.
I would say that there are some churches that have maintained that kind of prophetic stance. And then there were others that I think were swept away by this prophetic gospel or this prosperity gospel that, made such grandiose claims of naming it and claiming it, and that if you were not wealthy, then there was some fault of your own. And it was almost blaming the victim for his or her victimization in some instances. And so some of us got sucked into that vortex. But there were always churches, and there have always been churches in every generation that have maintained the prophetic witness of the church as a justice seeking church. Again, I would suggest that every Black church in its DNA is prophetic, in that it affirms Black existence. But not every congregation is a justice seeking congregation. And I think there we can draw a line of distinction there. And even in previous generations, I mean, you and I both know uh, of the rumors of folks that marched with Dr. King, and statistics just don't prove that there were that many people allied with Dr. King. In fact, Time magazine, if I recall correctly, deemed him the most unpopular man in America at the beginning of end of 67, beginning of 68. So, it's not a cup of tea that everybody wants to drink.
Let's go back to the beginning of the COVID pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Many were very dismayed that the Black church specifically did not step up and make a battle cry for the loss of Black and brown individuals because of this horrible, horrible, horrible pandemic that impacted our communities. In fact, there was seen and said by many that there was no rallying cry whatsoever. And I'm speaking of the global church,
Mm-hmm.
not individuals, because we both know that there were specific pockets where there was absolutely voices that were speaking, but in general, there was no unified voice. Is there a reason why, at that moment, as you've very well stated this, the prophetic voice was silent?
I don't know that I would agree with your categorization and your description. Many of our national religious bodies were some of the first in communities of color to cry for the vaccine and actually to advocate for the vaccine to be distributed in communities of color. In fact, I know of churches here in Northern Virginia that coalesce in Fairfax County that demanded that the county health systems begin to distribute the vaccines in communities of color. I don't know that again, I don't know that I agree with your description that there was not a unified voice. Um, Now, of course, you know, particularly in the early stages, all of us were a bit taken aback and frightened, and we didn't know what was going on other than folk were dying and dying in mass. But I think as the learning curve began to flatten just a little bit and we became aware of the vaccine, I think the Black church was on the vanguard of calling for vaccines and again to be distributed in communities of color because there were oppositions in some places that wanted to maintain it just for the general public
Mhm.
when people of color were dying at disproportionate rates because people of color were doing those menial jobs that help drive the economy.
Mhm.
And so that I can think of all of the I can't speak for other than Baptists because I'm Baptist, but I know all of the national Baptist bodies called for with a clarion call for the distribution of the vaccine for folks to get vaccines. I stood in the pulpit and myself and asked folks, listen, I know you may be afraid, and you may not know what's in the vaccine, but there's a whole lot of stuff you take that you don't know what it's constituting. So I don't know that I agree with that. I think part of the challenge when we start talking about the prophetic voice is the legitimacy of platforms. I think one of the reasons that the prophetic witness of the church is not often heard is because it often does not have the platforms of the normative media, standard media outlets. It gets played when it's convenient, but that doesn't mean that there aren't churches, there aren't pastors, there aren't institutions within the Black community that aren't advocating for Black life.
Let me just digress for a minute. Being a good Baptist that you are, of course, you spoke to the Baptist conventions. Was there a reaching across to your good AME or Methodist folks? Was there a reaching across to your good Kojic folk and the Pentecostal areas? And did y'all come together in unified statements? And the reason why I say that is most folks see the civil rights movement as the blueprint, if you would, for a movement, for a voice, and using that as the metric by which everything else is gauged, the
Mhm.
question becomes, we've never gotten to that point again.
See, again, I disagree because to use your analysis, the National Black Council of Churches made a concerted effort, and all of the members of that council, which covers the gamut of the Black church, AME Zion, Methodist, uh, all of the Baptist family, um, it made a concerted, unified statement. In fact, it had a strategy to touch churches in all 50 states. And
How did
so,
that turn out?
as part of the Virginia cohort, we were advised, we were incentivized, and we were educated on the reasons why we should advocate for the community um, for the vaccine. Again, I think it is not a matter. I think we set up the civil rights movement as the gold standard, and we should not. And I'm not trying to detract from the work that was accomplished because I'm the beneficiary of it. But I think in a modern 21st century world where information is disseminated at lightning speed, I don't know that we can use that as the gold standard anymore. That information travels at a more generic, organic pace, and that can be rapid due to social media.
And I'm glad you brought up social
And
media. So
so, well, let me just
go
elaborate
ahead.
a bit. So, take for instance, back in February, the call for a boycott against Target. That happened rather organically. It was not organized by the church, but churches participated in it, and it made, I think, an impact. I saw some statistics not too long ago. I don't remember them, but just that kind of grassroots organizing made an impact. And we have to remember that during the segregation era, where church networks and preacher networks in particular were much tighter, if you wanted something to be disseminated, you didn't put it in the newspaper. You just called the pastor in the next state, in the next town, because we were all connected,
Mhm.
because we didn't have any other outlets. With that no longer being the case, just like everything that integration transformed, um, then the way communication gets disseminated has also morphed. So I don't know that we should be measuring the witness, the modern witness of the Black church against the civil rights movement, because I think movements are always evolving, times are always changing, and so what we preach today cannot be what was preached in the 50s, the 60s, and even the 40s, or even the late uh, 19th century, going into the 20th century. Because while some of those injustices are still prevalent and probably will never go anywhere, they have again become more sophisticated in some instances, and because of that, our response has to be upgraded and more become more sophisticated.
Which actually leads to a wonderful definition. So, what are some of the most urgent issues the Black church should be addressing right now?
Hmm. As I think about it, I think about intrinsic issues and extrinsic issues. I think one of the things that we still wrestle with internally that requires a prophetic witness is, in some instances, the lack of female leadership in pastoral ministry. I think one of the other issues that many of us are going to have to wrestle with um, is what is a theological stance toward the notion of sexuality. And then also, I think now most recently, externally, we are going to have to be on the vanguard of voices to try to preserve this democracy, because this current administration is constantly overstepping and overreaching its constitutional authorities and powers. And the strategies are baked in uh, misanthropy, um, racialized rhetoric, and in some instances, just outright racism.
Mm.
And so
Mm.
I think that's going to demand our attention for the next few years. And then, of course, you know, there are always issues, and I think every community, the reason that there's a church in every community is because those issues are sometimes driven by local concerns and needs. So what is needed in Atlanta now may not be what's needed in Northern Virginia right now.
So, so help me with this, Pastor.
Oh, I know that's the setup.
No setup. So, are today's pastors and leaders equipped and willing to take on a prophetic role?
Equipped, yes, in the sense that the prophetic witness of the church, I think, is always grounded in a love for the people. If you love the people and you see the injustices that they're going through, it mandates some sort of action, some sort of organizing, some sort of sermonic witness. It demands it. The challenge I think that we have is also grounded in poor theology, in that many of us have confused charity with justice. And therefore, we think that many of our outreach ministries are actually justice ministries, when in actuality, they are ministries of charity. Now, don't get me wrong, Lord knows, charitable ventures are needed. They are part of the witness of the church. But as Dr. King put it, and this is the most succinct way that I can summarize it, charity says we help people in need. Justice asks, why is there a need? Dr. King put it this way: if the world is 75% water, why do we pay water bills? So if you're giving away food, you've recognized that there is food insecurity. But have we asked the question to go to the next level? Why are there hungry people? If we recognize that our school systems are failing and we offer tutoring ministries, those are great. But the question becomes, have we raised the question, why is there an achievement gap between Black and white students? Justice begins to address the gap in learning. Charity says we will offer help to those students who have fallen behind.
Okay. But you haven't answered my question. So they're equipped. Why aren't they willing?
Again, I don't know that people are unwilling. I think there are a lot of preachers, at least the preachers that I know and interact with, are doing justice work in their congregations at some level. You take Robert Charles Scott in Charlotte. His church has gone through and organized effectively the boycott against Target. There's a brother in D.C., George Gilbert, that is always on the front lines of any justice issue in the city, whether it is ecological, whether it is a sense that there's an unfairness in the school system. So there are plenty of preachers. I think again, the era is that we look at the civil rights movement as the gold standard on prophetic witness, and we're always looking for a messianic figure. When I believe that movements start maybe with messianic figures, but the disciples are always the ones that carry the Messiah's message to different places. And therefore, it grows beyond just the mere capacity of the messianic figure. We look at Jesus as our witness. He lives only 33 and a half years, but those 11 disciples and then the fill in after Judas, they take this thing and it becomes a global religion. Whereas previously it was just confined to the walking distance that Jesus could make in a day. And that's why I think we have to listen to his word when he says, greater things will you do than these. And he did great things, but he places the burden, the onus of responsibility of doing greater. And I think that's where we keep looking for some national messianic figure. And all the while we forget that what we consider to be the modern civil rights movement started as a local, with a local concern, a bus boycott in Montgomery.
I'm not going to give you the softball question that I was going to ask, only because you in preaching mode, and I need to flip your script real fast, which you know I can do. So, given the rise of social media and its impact, what happened to this unified broadcast of all these folks who are doing wonderful things? Why is there no cross pollination across sites so that these works are literally becoming the buzz of the social media?
And that is because, in my estimation, in my little thinking, the church has not become an expert at social media. We haven't. We have not learned to utilize it as a tool for greater. We've used it as a tool for survival, particularly coming out of the pandemic, but we have not necessarily, I think, manipulated it to its greater advantage. And I think there are several reasons for that.
Well, I think one of the reasons is that generation that is native to social media and its many offspring
Mm-hmm.
are not necessarily in the church.
Present in church, absolutely.
So the question becomes, how do you encourage our youth to not only return to the church, but become a part of the church? And I'm going to drill down a little bit deeper, specifically our young men.
I think that one, and I think all churches struggle with this because I shouldn't say all, most traditional churches are aging. And the tools of a new generation are, as you said, foreign and alien. So, how do we get young people engaged and active? I think we've got to give them place, give them opportunities for leadership, um, give them places where they are visible. Because one of the things we always talk about as a staff, young people are attracted to young people. They go where they see young people.
Absolutely.
And so we have to be intentional about that. And in particular, to attract young men or men in general, again, I think it is a matter of visibility. And with men in particular, it may just be that we've got to do a better job of old-fashioned discipleship. And when I say that, I mean taking a brother under your wings and walking with him, showing him the the strengths that he possesses, the weaknesses, sharing in group settings where there are safe spaces to talk about things that men deal with. I think those are some of the ways that that takes place. But you know, with men in particular, we often like to think that generations ago churches were inundated with men. That's not the case. I ran across a document the other day in my library from 1952. It was the moderator's address, Dr. Austin Bell, who was the moderator of the first district of Kentucky Baptist. And back in 1952, Kentucky Baptist meant Black Kentucky Baptist. And a part of his address to the first district was that he urged pastors to develop brotherhood ministries in the church, which suggests, if we look at rules and regulations and admonitions, you admonish people when something is not totally where it needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1952, his address is saying pastors need to develop intentionally men's groups. Now, we wouldn't call them brotherhood groups these days. Some folks may still. That's the nomenclature of the previous generation, I think. But whatever moniker you want to put on it, it's a small group for men. And then the other thing that I think we have to avoid, if you will, is just calling men together to do work, to paint the church, to move the furniture, to do those kinds of things. Those are necessary functions internally, but I think a men's group has to be more engaging than just finding some menial work.
You bring up a really good point. This address was given 70 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yet, succession planning in most churches is a closed system. We don't want folks who have not gone through modern day hazing to be elevated. Even though, and this is where we started this with social media, even though the management of social media to a teenager, somebody in their 20s, is nothing. They do it in their sleep. but we don't listen to them. There is no invitation for them. There is no specific planning for them to get into leadership. If they worked for a corporation, there would be an emerging leaders program where they would be gladly taken and embraced, mentored, coached, taught, trained to have all the skills necessary to get to the next level. Yet in the church, this is a foreign concept. And until they are, quote, vetted and included, their input doesn't matter. I'm not I'm not understanding that because my thought is that the prophetic voice should start at home.
When you say at home, what do you mean?
The church, the local church, the local body. If we are talking about the ability to see beyond our own shortcomings,
Mm-hmm.
we should be safe in our local church.
Mm-hmm.
We should have a place where, you know, Joe's son is a whiz at that. Give it to him. But Joe's son shouldn't have to go through 435 iterations of you need to go to this, you need to go to that, you need to go to this, you need to go to that before they're used. Why can't they just be used because they are subject matter experts and they're willing?
Again, I don't know that I necessarily agree with the picture that you're painting.
Okay.
Um, you make it sound as if there are hurdle upon hurdle upon hurdle that has to be jumped, um, and that's not always the case. I think you are starting to see churches that are doing that kind of intentionality, that are focusing on young persons, and you are seeing some reply. But as always, with any generation, church is a choice. And when you and I came along, we had no choice. These children today have many choices. And sometimes they choose, even though they are gifted and even though there is room for them, without all of the logistical hurdles that you have described. They just don't choose church.
They're not welcome, sir.
No, that's not always the case.
In many cases,
That's not always the
other
case.
than a robust vacation Bible school that may or may
That's
not
not
exist,
always the
when
case.
is the last time somebody went to the local high school and said, we are in need of social media specialists?
Well, you can't do that in most places in a local high school
Why not?
because that's illegal. That's considered proselytizing, and you can't do that.
If you have a job for them, it's not proselytizing.
Well, if you have a job for them, yes. But that then means that a church has to have the resources to do that. And that means then they have to have foresight to create a job description for that. That's a whole nother issue. But to
That's
say,
the basis of succession planning, sir. How in the world can you have an organization that you don't have job descriptions for?
see again, I think that what you are talking about takes place often, but at an informal level. takes place at an informal level.
Go on. I want to hear the rest of it. I
I'm
need to
not
hear
gonna
the
go.
rest of
I'm not
this.
gonna go any deeper because now this gets personal, and so I'm not gonna go there because you have to remember you and I have known each other for 40 years now. So I'm not gonna get personal. Uh, and we are not going to air our dirty laundry in a public context.
A note to file for all the audience. When Reverend Victor crosses his arms, he is now basically telling me, move on to the next question because I'm not going into that trap that you are setting for me. I'm not going to do it. So here's my question. In your circles, and you are a prolific figure in the Baptist circles,
Not
um,
quite.
whether you wish to or not. Are there any churches that are doing the work well of combining community development and youth development as a singular entity?
You broke up on me. You said community development and what?
Youth development.
Youth development. Yeah, I think that what you see here in Alfred Street Church in Alexandria is a prime example of that. Um, Wheeler Avenue in Houston, I would say, does an enormous job of that. And there, of course, are other churches, but those are the two primary examples that come immediately to mind.
So let's shift. Hmm. One of the issues that has been all over the news is the dealing with mental health challenges within
Mhm,
our community and often violence towards those with mental health challenges.
mhm.
And I know that your church specifically has done several forums on mental health and how that can be a portion of the church's stance and outreach. If your colleagues who are listening or are going to get this message don't necessarily believe that that is the church's concern, that's a community's concern, what would you say to them?
I would then, here is where, how do I put this? Since we are talking about the prophetic witness of the church, then here is where the pastoral and the prophetic lines of ministry become blurred. Caring for the total person is a pastoral concern. And that means we have to destigmatize mental health. It's not a disease. It's not, or I shouldn't say, getting help is not a disease. It is a necessary pastoral function. We have to be concerned about the total person. The prophetic aspect of it is when you consider the lack of access to quality, trained mental health professionals, that's where there is a opportunity to be prophetic, to advocate in the community that there is an openness and access to mental health offerings in a community. But I think it is an abdication of a pastoral role to just wipe your hands of that.
What's a good first step?
I think you talked about it earlier, listening.
Mhm.
Listening and observing. One of the things that I've been talking with my colleagues about here lately is, what are you seeing as a result of 5 years of people being isolated?
Mhm.
That there's a plethora of mental health challenges that are manifesting themselves and will probably take another 3, 4, 5 years to fully manifest themselves.
Mhm.
I mean, some of the things that I see are seniors who have friends who are talking about suicide,
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
know, and children. I mean, this is, I think, Mental Health Month, I
It
believe.
is.
And you see children who are contemplating suicide, and they haven't even started living really yet, but they're already taking matters into their own hands. I think those are some of the observations. Isolation, and then just a devolution of civility. People have forgotten how to be in community. And so
Mhm.
we've forgotten how to talk to each other. We've forgotten how to resolve conflicts. Uh, Road rage is on the rise. You know, just because you cut me off in traffic now, that merits my getting a pistol from, my glove box and doing damage and harm to others. I think those are all residuals of a pandemic that, in many instances, churches are not equipped to handle. And our role then as pastors is to, one, talk about the necessity of mental health, the centrality of mental health, that mental health is just as important as physical health and spiritual well-being. And then make sure that we funnel people to health professionals, mental health professionals that are trained to do that. Because the average pastor may get 1 or 2 courses in pastoral care,
Mhm.
and that's not enough to handle some of the stuff that I'm seeing now. And so, being a good pastor in this instance is recognizing your own limitations.
Yep.
There's some stuff when I see it, I'm like, okay, listen, I'm gonna try to get you some help, because what you are dealing with is beyond what I'm capable of dealing and handling. Not that I don't want you to get help, not that I think you are crazy, but it's beyond what I'm capable of doing. And so the best way for me to love you and show you love as a pastor is to get you to the persons that can do this much, much better than I can.
And that takes amazing confidence, because most folks would fake it until you make it and do irreparable damage
Mm-hmm.
to people. So, as our time is ticking, and it really is ticking fast, what risk does the Black church face when it speaks prophetically today? And are those risks worth taking?
Hmm. Well, I think in this current administration,
Mm.
the threat of retaliation is real. If the president will come after law firms that, have taken up lawsuits against him and advocated for positions, then we can expect at some point in the future that there may be retaliation from the government, though it will be definitely a violation of First Amendment rights. But I can see that on the horizon. And historically, The tool of the adversary has been violence against the prophetic witness of the Black church. We've seen folks come in and commit murder at Bible studies. We've seen churches historically burned to the ground. I think violence is a tool that may be a consequence. Is it worth it? My own sensibility says that doing right is always worth it. I'm reminded of a story that Calvin Butts, before he passed, told at Progressive National Baptist Convention one year. He had talked about how he had brokered a deal with Giuliani when he was the mayor. For the church, Abyssinia wanted to build a housing complex, I think, for seniors, and had gotten some money from the city to do so. Giuliani did something that was just not very righteous, and Dr. Butts criticized him and critiqued him, and it got back to the mayor's office. And the next day he got a call saying that the deal was off. Was it the right thing to do? And some would wrestle with this. You have an affordable housing complex for seniors, and now those seniors won't have housing, versus standing for the side of right. I think that's, for me, from my own theological orientation, that's just the price of bearing the cross.
Mm.
And that it is imperative that we always stand on the side of right and not the side of expediency.
So I'm going to throw you a curveball. Ready?
I don't know, but you can throw it.
It's going low. No,
I might strike out, but you can always throw it.
it's going low and away, just so you know. This generation is different. It's very, very different than past generations.
Mm-hmm.
They are more like the Black Panther movement than probably any other movement that has gone on.
Mm-hmm.
And many have said, should violence be what is portrayed in the community? They are ready to meet violence with violence. What say ye, sir?
Well, we must remember that Malcolm X was not the first one to coin the phrase by any means necessary. A Black Presbyterian preacher by the name of Henry Highland Garnett in 1870s, 1880s, put that as a part of his address, I think to the National Colored, whatever it was then, I can't remember. It wasn't a convention because it was a gathering of Black clergy and Black church folks, not under the umbrella of any one denomination. I think that we are going to have to be strategic in whatever means we need to be prophetic to maintain Black life. So you take, for instance, in Cincinnati a few months ago, when the police would not arrest the Klan that was crossing a bridge into the Black community, and they were going to arrest the folks that were gathered to protect their community rather than the folks affronting their community. And the Klan was armed, visibly armed. And the police did not arrest, did not check to see if they had carry permits, nothing. The black folk in Cincinnati, and I'm sure they were a part of Lincoln Gardens and some other churches there in the black community, said, okay, if you're not going to protect us, we're going to go home. We're going to get our guns. We will protect ourselves. Again, a part of affirming Black life is part of the prophetic witness. And I don't know that a nonviolent strategy is going to always be the strategy. I think we have to, in the spirit of Henry Highland Garnett, say any means necessary. And we have to also wrestle with who are the folks that are telling us that we shouldn't use violence, but the folks that are perpetrating violence against us. So it's not an acceptable form of protest for us, but they can use it whenever it's convenient and expedient. I don't know that I gel with that. But I think whatever means is used, the magnetic quality about it has to be generated in authenticity. And I think that's what the generation is looking for, authenticity. I mean, the conclave is getting ready to start, I believe, tomorrow to select a new pope. And one of the reasons that young people return to the Catholic Church, even after all of the scandals of sex abuse and other things, was because Francis was authentically Christian. Mm. The man is washing the feet of prisoners a couple of days before he dies. I just heard on the news this afternoon, in his will, he gives 200,000, I was going to say dollars, but what is it? Euro. 200,000 euro, all that he has, to a prison reform ministry that makes pasta and gives returning citizens, that's what we would call them. I don't know what they call them in Italy. Returning citizens another opportunity for re-engagement with society. Authenticity. I think that becomes what is convincing and has always been convincing in every generation. I mean, Fox talks about the church grows by the blood of the martyrs, that people were so authentically sold out in their Christianity that they gave their lives for the cross. And that doesn't mean that everybody's going to have to die for the cross in order for Christianity to spread, but I think it's going to require authenticity. And if you think about our own history, you know, it's May Elizabeth Jones in my little community who rounded up children to go to Sunday school and had a jar of Vaseline and one brush. And every child got his or her hair brushed and a little Vaseline put on them so that they could go to Sunday school. Authenticity. She loved the children that much. She rounded them up. It's just those kinds of things. I tell people all the time, I learned social justice not from a book, not even from the Bible, but I learned it from my grandmother, who as a child would allow me only to cross the street because we lived on a busy thoroughfare. And when we moved away, she kept all the grandchildren. So we stayed on a busy thoroughfare. And there was a blind man that lived on the other side of the street. Mr. Robert White, I think he had been blinded in World War II, and he had to cash his check at the mini market down the road. And she would send me across the street. She made sure I got across the street. She said, Junior, take Mr. Robert White down to the mini market and don't let them white folks cheat him out of his money. That's where I learned social justice. In the heart of a community with a heart for its people. And Mr.
Sir.
Robert White, because he was blind, and even if he had not been blind, I don't know that he could read, but I remember distinctly, he would put his scriggly X on his check and they would give him his money. And it was my job. Now, my grandmother died when I was 8, so I'm 8 and under. My job is to make sure that whatever he was supposed to get, he got. And that is the heart of justice, that everybody in the context of community is to get what they're supposed to get. And when we have systems in place that don't allow people to get what they need to flourish, then all of us who have some sensibility toward the divine should be incensed, should be angered, should be moved. Again, not just to ask the question of charity, but why is this man one being cheated? Why are there no banking institutions in this community? Why doesn't he have access to normative ways of finance? I learned that from at the hands of my grandmother. So, I mean, this is something that we have to be more sensitive to. And I think one of the things that has taken place in the church is that we have become so self-absorbed that we are not angered when we see injustice.
And I'm going to have to stop you right there because should I let you go down that slip and slide? That's another 2-hour conversation.
Not
Lord, yeah, really.
not
Really. Pastor Victor, I've only have one more question for you, and that is, are you willing to come back on so that we can finish this conversation?
sure, time permitting, opportunity presenting itself.
Really?
Really,
Really?
really,
That's gonna be your answer?
really.
Really? You couldn't just say yes.
No, I couldn't just say
You couldn't just say yes.
because it's you.
See how I'm treated. Well, I
you are,
thank you
you
so
are no
much.
way a victim.
I am so thankful for your time tonight. You have been wonderful. We're gonna go to some commercials and then we're gonna end the show. But thank you, thank you, thank you for everything that you've done for us on this evening. It has been invaluable.
Well, thank you for letting me just give you some of my musings in a public forum. Um, as they say, where I come from, that's just my little thinking. So God bless you for allowing me to think just a little bit, because that's about all I'm able to do
He's
is
so
think just
silly.
a little bit.
He's so
So
silly.
um, again, thank you for the opportunity. Of course, I'll be willing to come back and share at another time.
Perfect. Perfect. So, a couple of things that I need to go ahead and tell you all about. Um, Number one, for those who have not known, we are on day one of the Shift into Your Purpose 21-day journey. We began tonight and we're going to go throughout the beginning of June, 21 days, where we're going to deal with a number of things that are just going to be absolutely wonderful. And this is going to actually change so many folks. And there have been a number of folks who have asked the question, where and how do I get involved? And the easiest thing to do is if you want to join the Shift Challenge, all you have to do is go out to purposerefinedbyfire.com. At the bottom, there is a join now, and all you have to do is give us just a little bit of your information, and you will be receiving an email which gives you next steps that you can take and how to absolutely get involved. So purposerefinedbyfire.com for that. It's been a long night. It's been a good night. I thank you so much for everything that you do. Just remember that your purpose must be refined by fire for you to do everything that you were placed on this planet to accomplish. Thanks again.
We all want to be happy, but the majority of us have no idea what to do. See, the Japanese have a concept called ikigai, which roughly translates into a reason for being. You need to have a purpose for being here. But this is easier said than done because there are 4 components that you need to check off in order to achieve ikigai. Now, the interesting thing about this Japanese formula is that you can tell where you are in life and what you need to work on by looking at the components you have so far. If all you have is something that you love and are good at, then you have what's called a passion. On the other hand, if you have something that you love and you can see how the world needs it, then you have what's called a mission. Now, if you're someone who has something you get paid well for and are good at, then you have what most people in the world have, which is a profession. And finally, if you get paid well and it's something that you know can help the world, then you have what's called a vocation. You need to be spending your time doing something that you love, that you can get better at, that pays well, and that the world needs. Without all 4, you will always feel like you're missing something inside of you.
Follow us for more helpful tips.